Well, thank you for being with us today. I just want to share for a few minutes this morning about, we have a choice we can make as we travel through this world, as we travel through, our lives. And we can either be helpers or we can be those that hinder, can't we? We can be those that encourage, or we can be those that discourage. We can be a fault finder, right? Or we can be a faith builder. So we make that choice. We make that, it's a real choice. And that's just who God made me to be. He made me to be grumpy. He made me to be a grouch. He made me to pick out all the imperfections on everybody else. That's the way God made me. I don't think so. Let's not blame God for your bad disposition. I don't think that's the way it's supposed to be. It's we got to take some of that responsibility, right? I mean, even when we go back to the Garden of Eden, God makes humanity, sets us up there, and what does God say? It's good. I made them good. They're the ones that turned, right? God made them good. He sits back and he says, I like what I've made. I like what I've created. So, when we go through life and we do these things and we think about our attitude and we think about how we're treating others and how we're treating ourselves and our relationship to God, it comes down to us and how we're doing. So I just want to share with you, for a little bit about fault finders and faith builders, and which of those two will we be? Which of those two will we be? Plutarch, he was a Greek philosopher, and he was a writer, so he wrote a lot of different things in ancient Greece, and so I want to share with you one of the things that he wrote. In fact, this is in a little essay that he wrote about being a friend. Friend or flatterer is actually the title of the piece that he wrote. And he says, one should upset a friend only when it does him good, and should not let the upset destroy the friendship. It's pretty good advice, I think. He says, but should use sharpness like a medicine to preserve and protect the patient. Now, I think, if we take that to heart and how we address our friends, and that may be one of the problems, is that it is maybe in our vision, and I don't mean our actual physical sight, but how we view people. Do we view people as friends? Or do we see everybody as an enemy? Do we automatically kind of see people as an enemy, somebody that I'm going to struggle with? Or do we automatically see people as a friend or a potential friend? Which one of those do we really see people? When we put those glasses on, do we put friendship or foe spectacles on when we look at people? Do we see people most likely as enemies, or do we see them as friends? Do we see them as people who are going to compete with us about something, or do we see somebody that's going to walk alongside of us and help us? It seems in our society today, people see each other mostly as enemies. That they're just out to get me, and because of that, I'm out to get you, I'm out to undo you. We see it on the news, we see it all over. So, how do we see one another? Plutarch, in this ancient piece, talks about, friends. Genuine friends. I'm not talking about just Facebook friends. But friends. And he says, you should upset a friend only when it does him good, and should not let the upset destroy the friendship. How many times does that happen? You know, that's the stuff of movies. That it all upsets, you know, and it breaks everything. Should use sharpness like a medicine in order to heal. Well, let's go to another quote that I want to share from Thoreau. The fault finder will find faults even in paradise. Even in paradise. I think that's a great saying from Thoreau. You know, fault finders, that's just what they're looking for. And I'll share this right from the very beginning so we all kind of know where I'm coming from, I guess, is that a lot of fault finders find fault with everybody else because they see a lot of faults in themselves. That's why. And they don't want to look at their own faults. They don't want to address their own faults. So they start picking out the faults of everybody else, hoping that by pointing those out, they'll feel better about themselves. At least I'm not that bad. You know? I didn't do what Jack did the other day, so I'm a whole lot better than him. So, fault finders, they, as Thoreau says here, you know, they find problems and errors in paradise. Because that's just what they do. One, because they don't like who they are. And they don't like what they've done. And they don't like what they're thinking. And so a lot of times they'll find faults in everybody else. What did Jesus say about fault finding? Hey, last week I talked about how we're people of the Word. And we are, aren't we? So let's go to the Word. Let's see what Jesus says about fault finders. Here in Matthew chapter 7, he says, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite! First take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will clearly see, or you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye." But I'd much rather look at my brother. You know, I would much rather look at all of the imperfections and all of the other things that everybody else is doing wrong. Jesus is so to the point in this story that he uses to illustrate it, right? And of course, in the King James, it's talking about a splinter, right? Just this little. How many have ever had something in your eye? Yeah, the kids at school would always love it because I'd tell them, you know, I wear contacts. What? I'd say, yeah, I've got a contact in my eye. No, you don't. And so I'd get it right next to them, and I'd put my finger in my eye and I'd move it around. You know, they'd say, "That's weird. Stop it. Stop it." But you know what? Even though I can have these contacts in my eye, and I can't really feel them, but if an eyelash, or if that contact gets folded, then I can feel it. You know, just something, just a little piece of dust gets in there, it will start to irritate it. And we'll feel it, and we'll rub it, and get all red. And what Jesus is saying, even back then, they didn't have contacts, but even back then, they knew the irritation of something small in your eye and what it would do. And Jesus says, here's some, you know, Jesus is saying somebody else, you know, with just a little something in their eye, and there's somebody else with something huge in their eye, talking to this guy with the small speck. Jesus said, don't judge others. Don't judge others until you start working on you. Start working on you. Worry about that huge beam. There was a group, I think it was back in the 80s, it was a Christian group, and the name of their group was Plank Eye. And it was from this passage. But that was the group's name. They called themselves Plank Eye. You know, and so we've got these, what Jesus is saying, if you could just imagine the picture, you know, somebody with these huge beams, a 2x4 or something, you know, sticking out of one of their eyes, and they're trying to mess with somebody else's splinter, a little dust in somebody else's. Let me get that out of your eye for you. That looks like it really hurts. So that's what Jesus thinks about fault finding. Don't. You know, as a parent, I've been to those places where, you know, the kids were arguing. They're doing something over one another. They're saying what the other did, and that one's saying what the other did. And finally, as a parent, you say, stop it. Worry about yourself. And this is what Jesus is saying about fault finding. But again, we just want to see, and we want to try to get everybody else right. And the real reason seems to be because we aren't right, and we don't like us being right, but we don't want to focus on that. We don't want to focus on that. Let's go to that next one. Oh, thank you, Dave. Thomas à Kempis, in his writing about imitation of Christ, he says, a man ought to bear patiently whatever he cannot correct in himself and in others. If you cannot make yourself what you wish you to be. Now, let me read that again. But I want it just to soak in. This is, again, what Jesus is saying here in Matthew 7. If you cannot make yourself what you would wish to be, how can you bend others to your will? We want them to be perfect, yet we do not correct our own faults. We wish them to be severely corrected, yet we will not correct ourselves. Let me worry about you. Enough about me, let's talk about you. Right? Enough about me, let's just talk about you. Let's talk about each other. And again, is this why that, or this reason that we see other people, do we see them as our friends? Or do we see them as our enemies? Why do we point some of these things out? It gets back to that other story that Jesus told about the Pharisee and the publican. The publican goes in to pray. You know, he says, you know, I'm just a sinner. Help me. Forgive me. And then the Pharisee's there with all of his religious garb on, you know, and he's there, and Lord, I'm thankful that this is what I do, and I do this, and I do that. Ew! And I'm thankful I'm not like this guy. I'm thankful that I don't do things like this guy does. You know, the real difference is that the Pharisee, yeah, he was talking about about himself. He was focused on himself, but it was he was praising himself for all of those things. And then belittling the other, which the other was only talking about his failures. God, help me. Forgive me. I'm a sinner. Forgive me. Help me. We must, if we can't control, if we cannot take care of ourselves, if we cannot bring ourselves under subjection, what makes us think that we can mold somebody else? Fault finder characteristics. Let's take a look at some of those. One, fault finders are negative. They're negative. They don't have a whole lot of positive things to see. You know, I'm reminded of that movie, A Christmas Story, or A Christmas Vacation. You know, Clark, you know, his big thing, he's wanting the family at Christmas. He's wanting them all there. And they finally get there, and it's not all the fun he thought it was going to be. You know, but they all get there, and then he gets Russ, and they go out and they're putting all the lights on the house, you know, and he's got up there and he's just making a mess, and he's got the staple gun, and he's got all kinds of lights all over the house. And of course, at the extension cords, he's got that thing, it's just a mess. And he gets the whole family out there when it finally gets going. And the whole family's out there, and he lights it up, and the meter's spinning, you know, and everything's out there. And he goes to each one. He goes to each one. And then he gets to his father-in-law. You know, his dad tells him, you know, "You did a great job, Clark. Great job." And Clark's just crying, you know, "Thank you, Dad. You taught me everything I know about exterior illumination." You know, and then he gets, and everybody, you know, is great. His mother just, you know, doting all over him. And then he gets to his father-in-law. "The little lights aren't twinkling." That's a fault finder.
Yes, exactly.
That's a fault finder. You know, they'll find something to nitpick at. Something that wasn't right. Something that wasn't right. They're quick to point out problems, and they believe they're holy, like the Pharisee. They've really kind of duped themselves into thinking that type of criticism and belittling is some kind of holy act. That there's some righteousness behind it. And yes, there's a righteousness behind it. It's called self-righteousness. And again, it's because they want to feel better about themselves. And so they find all of these faults, or they think it's holy, and they believe they're God's fruit inspectors. And I've even heard it. I've heard it in church. I've heard people say, you know, "I'm not judging. I'm not judging. I'm just a fruit inspector. Checking the fruit." No, you're not. Oh, man, let's just get real, right? Let's get real. And so those are some fault finders. Well, what about faith builder characteristics? Let's take a few minutes and look at those. Faith builders are positive. Again, go back to Plutarch, remember? And I know, you know, I might be saying, "Well, Plutarch's not in the Bible." I understand that. I get Plutarch's not in the Bible. But it doesn't mean he doesn't have anything good to say. So, you know, he's talking about how do we treat our friends? What do we say? You know, that when you do, and some of us know, and we've probably had to have those conversations with good, close friends of ours, maybe family members, that we may have had to share. It doesn't mean that you never hurt people. And let me clarify that. It doesn't mean that what you say to individuals isn't going to hurt them. But you're not hurting them to hurt them. You got that? We're not hurting them. We're not saying anything to them. We're not doing what we're doing to hurt them. We're doing what we do. We're saying what we say to help them. And it's a lot like with children. Again, like raising children. Is that, you know, we love them. We want to better them. We want them to be better. And so some of the things we say and do to our children doesn't necessarily make our children happy, do they? But we do those, we say those things, we extend and practice those disciplines, not just to inflict, not just to hurt, not just to punish, but to teach. Do you ever notice that word discipline? It's real close to disciple, isn't it? Comes from the same word. So if, as a parent, as a Christian parent, okay, a follower, a Christian, when we discipline, it should always be good to remember discipline with discipling in mind. Not just for pain or punishment. And it's the same way with friends. It's the same way when we have to speak to somebody or to share with somebody a word of wisdom. It doesn't mean it's not going to be painful for them to hear. I'm sure what Jesus shared with a lot of the people, they didn't want to hear. How do we know that? Well, they killed him. They didn't want to hear that. They didn't want to hear what Jesus had to say. The Sermon on the Mount, what is it that Jesus says? You've heard it said, right, that you're not supposed to murder. Jesus says, he says, but I say, don't hate your brother. Oh, wait a second. It goes a little bit further. It goes a little bit deeper. See, one of the big things, I think, what happens in society, what's happening in society, is, yes, we want things to change. We want society to change. The problem is we're trying to change it from the outside in. That's the problem. We're trying to legislate change. We're trying to make change a social thing. And genuine change comes from the inside out. That's the whole point of the Sermon on the Mount. That's why when Jesus says, you've heard not to murder. We got that. We know that. Jesus says, don't hate. Jesus said, you've heard not to commit adultery. Jesus said, don't lust. He moves not just from these exterior things and not just changing the outside, but the inside. And every time I think of that passage, forgive me for using a lot of allusions today, but I think of that Andy Griffith episode when Andy is going to rehabilitate Ernest T.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. That's a good one.
And he takes Ernest T. and he tells, now Barney knows, right? Barney knows. This is the episode where Barney is the insightful one. And Andy's the one that's really kind of lost himself. But, Barney says he's a nut. It's not going to happen. But Andy takes Ernest T. into his home, puts a suit on him, dresses him up, teaches him how to pass the things, teaches him how to dance, teaches him how to ask for a dance, and is going to pass him off at Mrs. Wiley's. And at first she thinks he's from Boston. Andy has done all of the exterior things. He's dressed him up. He's taught him how to talk. He's taught him how to dance. He's taught him how to do all of these things. Right? Thank you for the dance. Thank you. No coffee to your punch. Thank you. And he has taught him all of that. But one thing happens. One thing happens that Andy didn't teach him. What happens when you meet opposition? And remember, he's there dancing with Ramona, and a guy cuts in. And then Ernest T., with his suit on and his dance moves and all that he knows what to say, goes back to Ernest T. In our society, what we're trying to do is change everything from the outside in. And what needs to happen is this change from the inside, and only God through Christ can do that. Now, I'm not saying things can't get better. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't work on changing things. Because even if we can do that for a while, it's going to make things better. But eternally and genuinely, The only thing that's going to change hearts and lives is when it's done from the inside out, not from the outside in. And faith builders know that, and that's what they're trying to do. They're not just trying to change the external. They're not just trying to tell somebody, hey, you might need to speak to your wife a little gentler. They're not just saying that to make somebody mad or angry. They're saying it to help them in their relationship with their wife to do that. Now, you just don't do that to anybody, of course. I'm talking about good friends, people in the faith, people that care and love one another, somebody that can share with you and that you can share with them. Faith builders are not blind to problems, but they also try to provide solutions and are ready to help. Right? They're not just one to give lip service, but they're ready to actually do something too. What can I do to help you? What can I do to help you in your growing process? Faith builders are aware of their weaknesses and imperfection, like Thomas à Kempis said. Right? We know that we have weaknesses. We know that that we're not perfect. But what can I do to help you? What can I do to help you grow? Faith builders don't see themselves as God's fruit inspectors, but as God's caretakers, watching over God's loved ones and helping them grow. Kind of getting back to the garden, when God tells Adam and Eve, to take care of it, that they're the overseers, it means a steward. It doesn't mean they're to abuse it. When we think about that over our relationships too, we're not over anybody. We're just to help one another. Again, do we see people as friends or enemies? Fault finders get bitter, and faith builders get better. Fault finders get bitter. They can get mad real easy. They can get upset real easy. They can get jealous real easy. They can get envious real easy. They can get bent out of shape real easy. And why? Well, because I'm aware of all these faults in me. Faith builders get better, and they try to help other people get better. And you know who knows all this better than anybody? Ourselves. We know where we are, don't we? We know. We know the thoughts we think. We know the words we say, why we say them. We know all of that. We know. We know us. The church needs faith builders and not fault finders. Faith builders. And I'm thankful that we have a congregation of faith builders. I'm thankful that there isn't all of this backbiting and anger and bitterness and pain and hurt and all of this in our congregations. I've been in congregations where that's happened. Right? Brother Bowie pointed earlier. That gentleman about his pastor praying too much. I don't know who he was. But he's a fault finder. Just think of even just what we know. He's a fault finder. Pastor's praying too much. What can we do? Let's get rid of him. Let's get rid of him. Causing problems. Instead of, maybe pastor's on to something. Maybe I need to pray more. But I'd rather go after somebody else with a speck in his eye than recognize the beam in my own. So the big question, right? The big question is, which will we be? Which will we be? Will we be a fault finder, or will we be a faith builder? Lord, I thank you today. Thankful for your word. Thankful, God, that you and your Holy Spirit continues to speak to our hearts, continues to speak to our lives, guiding us and directing us, Lord, into the way that you want us to be. And Lord, I know there are times in our lives when we might look through different lenses. Lord, and as much as we want to be faith builders, sometimes we find ourselves looking through the lens of the fault finder. God, help us in those moments. Help us to recognize that. Help us to see that. And help us to take those off and put the faith builder glasses on. And Lord, because I believe that's what your Holy Spirit wants us to do. I believe you want us to help one another, love one another, encourage one another. But Lord, in those times that your Holy Spirit speaks to us and moves us and asks us, and moves us to address the problems in somebody else's life, not just to make problems, but Lord, to help the other. Help us to do it with wisdom. Help us to do it with patience. Help us to do it with your guidance and your help. In your name, Jesus, we pray. Amen. There are times in our lives that, again, that I think the Lord may call us to share with somebody. But when we do, again, we want to do it with love. We want to do it with patience and wisdom. No, we don't want to belittle the other person. We don't want to make them feel bad. We're not doing it to hurt anyone. Maybe we're doing it to help and to guide. And with all of that, there are times, and as much as we want to be faith builders, sometimes we may put on those fault finder glasses. That's why it's important to recognize when we do. It doesn't mean we're failures when we do that. It doesn't mean that it's all over. It doesn't mean we just recognize it. Conviction isn't a bad thing. It's a good thing.